My husband Arthur's prized rose garden, his legacy, was set ablaze by our son, Brian. He then demanded I sign away our home for a strip mall, mocking my helplessness since Arthur passed. I simply watched the flames, remembering the disturbed earth by the compost pile. Brian thinks I'm weak, but he's about to discover Arthur taught me more than just gardening. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from, as I tell you my story. The morning sun, usually a gentle caress through the bedroom window, felt strangely harsh, an unwelcome intrusion. Eleanor stirred, still tangled in the hazy comfort of a dream where Arthur was laughing, his strong hand in hers. Then, a sound, sharp and out of place, tore through the lingering sleep, a rhythmic sloshing, followed by an acrid chemical smell. Gasoline. Her eyes snapped open. 7 a.m. She stumbled out of bed, a chill snaking up her spine. The smell was stronger now, metallic and sickening. From the kitchen window, her breath caught in her throat. Brian, her son, stood in the garden, not with a shovel or pruning shears, but with a bright red jerry can. He was systematically dousing Arthur's prize-winning David Austin roses, their petals still dewy with morning mist, their fragrance soon to be replaced by something vile. "Brian, please," she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound, barely audible over the growing dread in her chest. She pushed open the back door, the cool morning air doing little to steady her trembling hands. "Please don't do this." He turned, his face devoid of any warmth, any recognition of the man who had planted these roses, cherished them, talked to them as if they were old friends. His eyes, usually a reflection of Arthur's kind gaze, were now flat, almost opaque. "Mom, you need to accept reality," he stated, his voice calm, terrifyingly rational. "Dad's gone. These plants aren't bringing him back, and frankly, we need the money more than we need a garden." The word struck her like a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of her hope. Before she could react, before her stunned mind could fully process the horror, Brian flicked a lighter. A small spark, then a hungry orange tongue licked at the rosebush, instantly engulfing it. The crackle was sharp, almost joyful, as the flames devoured the delicate petals, the vibrant green leaves, turning them to a greasy, black char. Eleanor watched, paralyzed, as Arthur's beloved David Austin roses, his cherished hybrids, and the other meticulously cared-for plants burned. It felt as though Arthur was dying again, the fire consuming not just Flora, but the very essence of his presence, his passion, his quiet joy. The smoke, thick and suffocating, carried the stench of grief. She remembered Arthur's face, beaming with pride, when he'd won the blue ribbon at the county fair, not just once, but 3 years in a row, for his English roses. He'd carefully tended to each bush, whispering secrets to them, protecting them from pests and disease. This garden was his legacy, his sanctuary, a living testament to his patient hands and loving heart. Now, it was an inferno. Brian watched the destruction with an unnerving detachment. "Dad was a dreamer, Mom," he said, kicking at a smoldering cinder. "This whole place is a money pit. But it's prime real estate. Think of the potential." His voice was devoid of emotion, a businessman assessing an asset, not a son mourning his father or a son comforting his mother. As the fire spread, threatening the rows of heirloom tomatoes and the fragrant herbs of the vegetable garden, a flicker of defiance sparked within Eleanor. This was too much. This was everything. She lunged forward, trying to grab the jerry can from his hand, a desperate, futile attempt to stop the rampage. "No, not the vegetables. Arthur grew these for us." Brian roughly shook her off, his grip surprisingly strong. "Arthur's dead, Mom," he repeated, his voice firm, unwavering. "And his sanctuary isn't paying the bills. You need to understand this." He gestured with the empty can toward the entire property, not just the garden. "I've already spoken with Thompson Commercial Properties. They're very interested. We're going to build a strip mall." The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. A strip mall. Here, where Arthur had spent countless hours crafting the intricate latticework of their gazebo, where he'd carefully planted rows of calming lavender, where they'd shared so many quiet evenings watching fireflies dance. No, Eleanor cried, tears finally blurring her vision. Arthur built that gazebo with his own hands. The lavender. It's my inheritance. Brian cut her off, his tone dismissive. It's what's practical now. He then slid a stack of legal documents across the charred patio table. I need you to sign these papers for the developer by the end of the month. His eyes, a moment ago just flat, now held a cold, calculating glint. I won't, she stated. The refusal, a surprising surge of strength from deep within her. Brian's lips curled into a humorless smile. Dad left the property 50-50, Mom. If you don't sign your half, I'll sell mine. Then you'll be a minority partner, living next to a construction site, with no say in anything. And believe me, Thompson Commercial Properties doesn't deal with minority partners who can't see the bigger picture. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. You're 65 years old, Mom. You can barely handle the grocery shopping since Dad passed. Do you really think you can manage this property alone? Take on developers? Lawyers? His words were laced with a cruel truth. Since Arthur's death, every simple task felt monumental. She'd forgotten appointments, misplaced keys, struggled with unfamiliar technology. Her protests, weak and fragmented, were met with Brian's mocking laughter. He saw her as frail, incompetent, a relic. Arthur's medical bills consumed most of our savings, Brian continued, relentless. And his life insurance, while generous, isn't going to last forever, not with your limited capabilities. He pulled out a glossy brochure, a pristine rendering of a generic strip mall, all glass and concrete, completely devoid of character. This is our future, Mom. This is stability. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing amidst the acrid smoke and the smoldering ruins of Arthur's dreams. You've got a week to think about it, he called over his shoulder. But the contractors are arriving Monday. Regardless, as the last tendrils of smoke curled into the morning sky, Eleanor felt a tremor under her feet. She looked down, her gaze drawn to the damp earth near the old compost pile, a spot Arthur had always treasured for its rich soil. The ground there looked disturbed, as if something had recently been buried, then hastily recovered. A cold knot formed in her stomach, but it wasn't fear. It was something else. A flicker of curiosity, a seed of a plan. The heavy roar of diesel engines and the insistent clang of metal on metal ripped through the morning quiet. It was Monday, precisely 1 week after Brian's scorched earth declaration. Eleanor watched from her kitchen window as a crew of men, clad in fluorescent vests, swarmed over her garden. Leading them was a man named Mike, his kind, weathered face topped with a hard hat. He approached her door with a clipboard and a respectful nod. "Morning, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice deep and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos unfurling behind him. "Mike Peterson, Thompson Commercial Properties. We're here to start the preliminary site clearing." He gestured vaguely at the decimated garden. "It'll take a couple weeks to get the lot prepped for commercial development. Our job is to make sure everything's cleared out, level, and ready. If we find anything unusual, we'll let you know. Of course." He offered a small, reassuring smile, seemingly unaware of the fresh wounds the word unusual inflicted. Unusual. The word echoed in Eleanor's mind, stirring a dormant unease. Arthur, in his final months, had developed an unsettling habit. He had always been a creature of routine, predictable, and open. But toward the end, a subtle shift had occurred. He'd become secretive, especially around the compost corner, the very spot where she'd noticed the disturbed earth yesterday. She'd wake in the dead of night, sometimes, to the soft glow of a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, seeing him hunched over, digging. When she'd asked what he was doing, he'd offer a gentle smile, a twinkle in his tired eyes, and say, "Just a special project, my love. Something for after I'm gone. A little surprise for you." She'd dismissed it as Arthur being Arthur, always thinking of others, even in his decline. But now, with the memory of the disturbed earth and Mike's promise to report anything unusual, a cold certainty began to settle in her stomach. At noon, the familiar rumble of Brian's expensive SUV pulled into the driveway. He emerged, a crisp white shirt beneath his sport coat, holding 2 cups of coffee and a bag of deli sandwiches. "Mom," he called out, his voice sharp and impatient. He handed her a lukewarm coffee, then strode over to Mike, clipboard in hand. "Mike, Thompson Properties wants to break ground in 30 days, tops. Let's make sure we're on schedule." His tone left no room for negotiation or delay. Mike nodded, pushing his hard hat back slightly. "Understood, Mr. Vance. We're moving as fast as we can. Got to say," he added, eyeing the deep, dark earth of the former garden, "this is some of the richest soil I've ever seen. Perfect for anything, really," Brian scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Rich soil doesn't pay the bills, Mike. Get it cleared." He shot a glance at Eleanor, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips, as if to remind her of his practicality, his superior grasp of reality. The day dragged on, the relentless drone of machinery, a painful soundtrack to Eleanor's thoughts. She tried to busy herself indoors, but her gaze kept returning to the window, to the churning earth, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. What if Mike found something? What if Arthur's special project was unearthed? And what exactly was it? Then, around 3 in the afternoon, her internal alarm bells went off. Mike's voice, raised above the din, called her outside. She hurried out, her steps quickening as she saw him standing by the now demolished compost pile. In his gloved hands, he held a small, heavy metal box, encrusted with a thin layer of damp soil. "Mrs. Vance," Mike began, his eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "We found this. About 3 feet down, right where that compost pile used to be." He tilted the box, revealing its solid, unassuming form. "The soil around it was definitely disturbed," he added, his gaze flicking to Eleanor's face, like someone buried it recently. Then tried to cover it up. Eleanor's hands began to shake uncontrollably as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, damp metal. The weight of it was substantial. Surprisingly so. This was it. This had to be Arthur's secret, his special project. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of possibility and apprehension. Mike seemed to hesitate, glancing from the box to Eleanor's pale face. "Should I keep digging in that area, Mrs. Vance? Or check with Mr. Vance?" The question jolted her. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, though a tremor ran through it. "Don't mention this to Brian. Not yet." She clutched the box tighter, pulling it protectively against her chest. "Just move on to the next section." Mike, though clearly confused by her urgent tone and the sudden shift in his instructions, simply nodded. "All right, Mrs. Vance, as you wish." He gave a final, questioning look at the box, then turned and walked back to his crew, leaving Eleanor alone with the unearthed secret. She rushed back inside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, convinced this was the truth Arthur had wanted her to find. The box was not just metal. It was a connection, a final message from the man she loved. She carried it to the kitchen table, setting it down with a thud. For a full hour, she simply stared at it, her mind a dizzying swirl of speculation. What could be so important, so secretive, that Arthur felt the need to bury it? And why did she have to hide it from Brian? Finally, with a deep breath and trembling fingers, she pried open the rusted clasp. Inside, nestled securely within several layers of thick, clear plastic wrap, were a stack of documents, a handful of faded photographs, and a single envelope. Her name, Eleanor, was written on the front in Arthur's familiar, elegant script. She pulled out the letter first, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. The first lines, penned in the hand that had held hers for over 40 years, sent a chill through her. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray you found this before anyone else did. I've discovered some things about Brian that I didn't have the heart to tell you while I was alive, but you need to know the truth about our son." Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, the letter clutched in her trembling hands. Arthur's handwriting, usually so fluid and strong, now showed a faint tremor, a testament to the illness that had ravaged his body, even as his mind remained sharp. It was deliberately written, each word carefully chosen, as if he knew this would be his final, most important message to her. She began to read, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. Arthur explained that in his final months, as his health declined and his mind struggled through the haze of medication, he had started to keep a closer eye on their finances. He'd noticed little irregularities at first, small discrepancies that he'd initially dismissed as his own failing memory, blaming it on his medications, making my thinking fuzzy. But Arthur was a meticulous man, a former accountant who knew the value of every penny, and the inconsistencies nagged at him. He began to keep detailed records, cross-referencing bank statements with receipts and withdrawals. The truth, when it emerged, was far more painful than any symptom of his illness. Eleanor, my dearest, the letter continued, I found undeniable proof. Brian has been taking money from our joint checking account, not huge sums that would trigger an immediate alarm, but small amounts. $50 here, $100 there, sometimes a bit more, consistently, over a long period. When I finally totaled it up, I discovered he'd siphoned nearly $8,000 over the past 2 years alone. A wave of nausea washed over Eleanor. $8,000. The figure hit her with the force of a physical blow. Suddenly, their increasingly tight finances made agonizing sense. She'd attributed their struggles to Arthur's mounting medical expenses, to the rising cost of living, to her own occasional carelessness. Never once had she suspected their own son. It explained why they'd had to dip into savings more often, why Arthur had grown visibly stressed about their future. Brian, her own flesh and blood, had been stealing from them. Arthur had confronted Brian, the letter revealed, just 3 weeks before he passed. Brian, cornered by his father's irrefutable evidence, didn't deny it. His response had been chillingly devoid of remorse, a casual dismissal that cut Arthur to the core. He simply said he was just borrowing what would be his inheritance anyway, and that I was being ridiculous. What truly worried Arthur, however, wasn't just the theft, but Brian's reaction when Arthur had asked for the money back. His face went cold. Eleanor. He became angry, almost threatening. He accused me of being selfish, of hoarding money I wouldn't live to spend. It was then I realized, with a pain that overshadowed my illness, that Brian doesn't see us as his parents anymore. He sees us as obstacles to his inheritance. The words resonated with the cruel detachment Eleanor had witnessed in Brian's eyes just days ago as he stood over the burning roses. Arthur's premonition had been terribly accurate. I fear, my love, the letter concluded on this point, that once I'm gone, he will pressure you into signing over everything we've worked for, everything we built together. He has no respect for our legacy, only for the cash value of the land. Eleanor's gaze dropped to the contents of the box. True to Arthur's meticulous nature, everything was neatly organized. There were printouts of bank statements, highlighted sections clearly showing Brian's unauthorized withdrawals, copies of checks with Brian's undeniable signature. There were also legal papers, their will, the deed to the house, all meticulously kept, just as Arthur had always done. But at the very bottom, beneath these damning proofs and essential documents, lay a plain manila envelope, thicker than the rest, with "For Eleanor" only scrawled across it in Arthur's hand. Her heart hammered with renewed anticipation. She pulled it out, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. Inside, she found a stack of investment portfolio statements from a firm she didn't recognize. As she flipped through them, her eyes widened. Arthur had been secretly moving money, not from their main savings, but from small, unused funds, spare change, gifts, and even some of his smaller pension payouts, into a separate investment portfolio. A portfolio entirely in her name, unknown to Brian. He had been quietly building this nest egg for years, a silent act of love and protection. She scanned the final balance at the bottom of the latest statement. Her breath hitched. A gasp escaped her lips, a mix of shock, relief, and profound awe. The number stared back at her. Nearly $200,000 in investments, accumulated steadily over the past 10 years. This wasn't just a safety net, it was a substantial fund. Affixed to the top statement was a small, familiar yellow sticky note. Arthur's familiar, slightly crooked handwriting, a final whisper from beyond the grave, read, "This is for your security, my love. Brian can't touch this account because it's in your name only. Use it to keep the house, the garden, whatever makes you happy. Don't let anyone pressure you into giving up the life we built together." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, hot and cleansing. Tears of overwhelming gratitude for Arthur's foresight and unwavering love. Tears of searing grief for the man she had lost, who had protected her even in death. And tears of a burgeoning, righteous anger at her son, Brian, who had driven Arthur to such lengths. He thought she was helpless, a frail old woman. He had no idea what Arthur had left her. After absorbing the revelation of Arthur's secret nest egg, Eleanor's fingers brushed against something else at the bottom of the metal box. It was a small, unassuming digital recorder, no bigger than her palm. Another sticky note, this one bearing Arthur's shaky handwriting, was affixed to it. "Play this alone." A fresh wave of apprehension washed over her. What else could Arthur have recorded that he felt the need to hide even more carefully than the financial documents? She found Arthur's old, over-ear headphones, the ones he used to listen to classical music while he worked in his study, and plugged them into the small device. With a trembling finger, she pressed play. A faint static preceded a voice, weak, raspy, but unmistakably Arthur's. The familiar cadence sent a fresh pang of grief through her, yet his tone was resolute, almost defiant. "Eleanor," Arthur began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm recording this because I need you to understand how serious this situation is." The letter explained some things, but this is what truly solidified my fears. Eleanor leaned forward, her breath held captive in her chest. "Yesterday," Arthur continued, his voice gaining a slight tremor, "Brian came to visit while you were at the grocery store. He sat by my bedside, and after a few pleasantries, he asked me directly when I was planning to die because he has some business opportunities that require immediate cash flow." Eleanor gasped, a sharp, choked sound. The headphones almost slipped from her ears. Her heart stopped, a painful, frozen moment in time. "He asked me directly when I was planning to die." The callousness, the unfeeling brutality of the question, struck her with more force than any physical blow. Her own son, asking his dying father for a death date. It was monstrous. Arthur's voice, though pained, continued its chilling recount. He then proceeded to show me pictures on his phone. Expensive properties he wants to flip for profit, luxury cars he wants to buy. He said he needed his inheritance now, that he couldn't wait any longer, that these deals won't wait for a dying man to finally kick the bucket. A cold rage, unlike anything Eleanor had ever felt, began to simmer within her. The image of Brian, sitting by his dying father's bedside, not offering comfort or love, but demanding money, was sickening. "I told him," Arthur's voice hardened slightly, "that he would have to wait like everyone else, that our money was for our life, for our security, and for whatever you might need after I was gone, and that's when he got angry." "Really, angry, Eleanor?" The recording captured a slight rustle, perhaps Arthur shifting uneasily in his bed. "He accused me of being selfish, of preventing him from living his life. He said I was holding him back, just like I'd always held him back with my ridiculous garden and old-fashioned values. It was then, Eleanor, that I realized I couldn't trust him. Not with anything. Not with you. I knew I had to act." Eleanor yanked the headphones off, the sound of Arthur's voice abruptly cut off. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or grief. It was from pure, unadulterated fury. Brian, her own son, had been circling like a vulture, waiting for his father to die, not out of concern or love, but out of greedy anticipation. He had seen Arthur, and by extension herself, not as family, but as a bank account, an obstacle to his selfish ambitions. It all clicked into place. Arthur hadn't just been preparing for his death. He had been preparing for Brian's betrayal. He had seen through their son's manipulative facade, anticipated his avarice, and with his last reserves of strength and love, he had protected Eleanor. The secret nest egg, the carefully organized documents, And now this horrifying recording. Arthur had laid a meticulous trap, a final act of devotion to safeguard her future. Outside, the incessant thud and grind of the excavator continued, tearing at the earth that had once nourished Arthur's dreams. But now, the noise sounded different to Eleanor. It wasn't just destruction, it was excavation. She knew, with a certainty that vibrated through her bones, that there were more buried treasures, more pieces of evidence Arthur had hidden away. He hadn't just planted roses, he had planted secrets, strategically placed to bloom at the precise moment of need. Her mind, once clouded by grief and a sense of helplessness, began to clear. She quickly calculated her new financial standing. With Arthur's secret nest egg, she wasn't a frail old woman with limited capabilities, struggling to buy groceries. She was a woman with nearly $200,000 in liquid assets, more than enough to fight Brian's development plans, more than enough to secure legal counsel. She even realized, with a thrilling surge of power, that she might very well be able to buy out his half of the property, leaving him with nothing. But before she moved forward, she needed to be sure. She needed to know what else Arthur had hidden in his garden, in the very earth that Brian was so carelessly tearing apart. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, a gentle knock sounded at her door. It was Mike. His face flushed with excitement, his eyes bright. He looked as though he'd unearthed a priceless artifact. "Mrs. Vance!" he exclaimed, barely containing his enthusiasm. "We found something else. Something bigger this time. You're going to want to see this." Before we continue this gripping tale, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single part of Eleanor's journey. Let's find out what secrets Arthur truly buried. Mike's urgent voice, vibrating with barely contained excitement, cut through the quiet of the late afternoon. Eleanor, still clutching Arthur's damning letter and the tiny recorder, practically flew out the door. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the ravaged landscape of what was once her garden. The excavator, a colossal, yellow beast, stood silent and still, its massive arm frozen mid-air. The entire crew had gathered around a newly exposed cavity in the earth, a gaping maw near the spot where Arthur's vibrant tomato plants had once thrived. "Mrs. Vance, over here!" Mike called, waving her closer. As she approached, he gestured into the deep hole. "There's a whole concrete structure down there, ma'am, like a bunker or something. And it's not old. This was built recently." Eleanor peered over the edge, her breath caught. Below, partially obscured by disturbed earth, lay a concrete vault. It was surprisingly large, roughly the size of a small room, with thick, reinforced walls. In the center of one wall, a heavy metal door, dull and imposing, was clearly visible. It looked impenetrable, designed to withstand far more than the pressure of soil. A gasp escaped her lips. This was far more than she could have imagined. This was a sanctuary, built not just for things, but for secrets. Mike's brow furrowed. Did Mr. Vance ever mention anything about building something like this? A root cellar, maybe? Or a storm shelter? Eleanor shook her head, still in shock. No. Never. But as she said the words, the pieces of Arthur's secretive behavior in his final months clicked into place with chilling clarity. The late-night digging she'd dismissed as a special project, the sudden new tools in the shed, the way he'd been so particular about the privacy of that section of the garden. He hadn't just been preparing for his death. He had been constructing a fortress, a final stronghold of truth. "It's definitely not old," Mike reiterated, his voice lowering with a touch of awe. "Based on the concrete and rebar, I'd say it was poured within the last year or two. We should probably stop work until we figure out what this is. Might need a structural engineer. Or even authorities." Just as he finished speaking, the familiar rumble of Brian's SUV announced his unwelcome arrival. Eleanor's eyes darted to the driveway, then back to Mike, her heart leaping into her throat. "No," she hissed, her voice a fierce whisper. "Don't say anything to my son about this. Not yet. Please, Mike. I need your help to keep this quiet." Mike looked bewildered, but something in Eleanor's desperate gaze, perhaps the raw determination she now exuded, made him nod quickly. "All right, Mrs. Vance. Crew, tarps over the pit, quick, get everything covered." The workers sprang into action, hastily dragging large, heavy tarpaulins over the gaping hole, camouflaging the unearthed vault just as Brian rounded the corner of the house, his expensive briefcase swinging at his side. He wore a predatory expression, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, as if he knew he was walking into a victory lap. "Progress report, Mike?" Brian demanded, his eyes scanning the scene, missing the subtle tension in the air. Mike, surprisingly composed, adjusted his hard hat. "Moving along, Mr. Vance. Just tidying up the last bits before we start on the leveling." He met Brian's gaze with a steady, unrevealing expression, his silence a masterful omission. Brian nodded, satisfied. He turned to Eleanor, pulling out a stack of thick legal contracts from his briefcase. "Good. Mom, here are the papers. Thompson Properties is ready to move. Just sign where the yellow tabs are. It's all standard. Your half, quick and easy." He held out the documents, expecting her to take them without question, but Eleanor didn't reach for them. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest, a new steel in her gaze. "I'm not signing anything today, Brian. I need time to read through these." Brian's jaw tightened, the mask of pleasant confidence slipping. "Time? What do you need time for?" "It's a standard real estate contract. They're offering you fair market value, $200,000 for your half of the property, more than enough for you to get a nice little condo somewhere." He tried to sound magnanimous, but the impatience was barely concealed. The figure, $200,000, hit Eleanor like a small, cold shock. The exact amount of Arthur's secret investment. It was too much of a coincidence. Brian clearly thought he was being clever, offering her the same amount he believed he was entitled to, making it seem like a generous, undeniable offer. He had no idea Arthur had already given her that security. Eleanor met his gaze, a quiet resolve settling over her. "I appreciate the offer, Brian. But I'll be insisting on an independent appraisal. Just to be sure." Brian's anger flashed, his face turning a mottled red. "An appraisal? Are you serious, Mom? That'll cost money and time. Thompson Properties won't wait forever. This is a good deal. Don't you understand how quickly these things can fall through?" He was employing every pressure tactic in his arsenal, trying to make her feel foolish, indecisive, weak, but Eleanor simply shook her head, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'm not signing anything today." He stared at her, his eyes narrowed, a vein pulsing in his temple. He seemed utterly blindsided by her unexpected resistance. With a frustrated growl, he stuffed the contracts back into his briefcase. "Fine," he snarled. "But don't come crying to me when you've lost out on a fortune, holding onto a property that's only going to be worthless once the bulldozers start." He muttered a few more unintelligible threats under his breath, then spun on his heel and stomped back to his car, slamming the door with a reverberating bang before speeding off. As the sound of his engine faded, Eleanor turned back to Mike, her expression grim but determined. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the covered pit in deep shadow. "Mike," she said, her voice low and steady, "I need you to help me open that structure. Tonight." The last vestiges of twilight had faded, replaced by the inky blackness of a moonless sky. Eleanor stood beside Mike, the covered pit looming like a secret beneath their feet. "This is my property," she stated, her voice steady, though her heart pounded a frantic rhythm. "And that was built by my husband. I have a right to know what it is. Please, Mike." Mike, after a moment of consideration, nodded slowly. "All right, Mrs. Vance, but we go slow. No risks." He retrieved a powerful work lamp from his truck, its beam cutting a swath through the darkness. Together, they carefully removed the heavy tarps. The powerful light illuminated the exposed concrete walls, revealing them to be thick, expertly finished, and sealed with a dark, waterproof membrane. "This is serious construction," Mike muttered, tracing a finger along a seamless joint. "Not a DIY job. Not entirely. Whoever built this, knew what they were doing. A realization dawned on Eleanor. Arthur, before his retirement, had been a general contractor. He had built countless homes, overseen massive construction projects. He wouldn't have hired someone to build a secret bunker on his own property. He would have done it himself, piece by laborious piece, under the cloak of darkness, to maintain absolute secrecy. The depth of his foresight, and his silent struggle, twisted in her gut. Mike lowered a sturdy aluminum ladder into the hole, securing it at the top. He then shone the light into the darkness, checking for any obvious hazards. Before turning to Eleanor, "Looks clear, ma'am. But be careful." In another where, taking a deep breath, Eleanor descended, her hands gripping the cold rungs, her feet finding purchase on each step. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint, earthy scent. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she found herself in an underground room, surprisingly spacious, roughly 10 by 12 feet. The beam of Mike's lamp revealed a meticulously organized space. Shelves, sturdy and built into the concrete walls, lined the perimeter, laden with dozens of plastic storage containers, all carefully labeled in Arthur's familiar, elegant handwriting. In the center of the room, a large, heavy-duty safe stood like a sentinel, its metallic surface glinting in the harsh light. Eleanor gasped, moving closer to the shelves. Her eyes scanned the labels. Financial records, insurance documents, property deeds, investment records, portfolio 2. The last one sent a fresh jolt through her. Portfolio 2? That meant there were even more secret investments, even more funds Arthur had painstakingly hidden from Brian's greedy gaze. He had built a fortress of financial security, piece by piece, document by document. Mike, peering down from the opening, whistled softly. "Your husband built himself a bunker, Mrs. Vance. This is the kind of place someone builds when they're preparing for trouble." "He was," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her hand reaching for a container labeled Brian Evidence File. With trembling fingers, she unlatched the lid. Inside, she found a meticulously compiled collection of photographs, bank statements, and legal documents. As she sifted through them, the full, sickening scope of Brian's betrayal unfurled before her. There were photos of checks, made out to cash, bearing her own forged signature, unauthorized withdrawals from their joint accounts that she'd never sanctioned, copies of credit card applications in her name that she'd never opened, revealing lines of credit taken out and maxed by Brian. Each document was a fresh stab of disbelief, a testament to her son's insidious, calculated fraud. "Oh my God," she whispered, the words barely audible. "He took out a second mortgage on the house, without my knowledge." The weight of that particular revelation almost buckled her knees. The house, their home, was not just theirs, but also a pawn in Brian's scheme. Further down, she found a thick manila folder labeled, chillingly, "Insurance fraud, life insurance policy." Inside were copies of correspondence with Arthur's life insurance provider. Brian, it seemed, had not only tried to ascertain Arthur's death date, but had also attempted to increase Arthur's life insurance coverage in the final months of his illness, actively downplaying his father's rapidly deteriorating health and forging signatures on the applications. He hadn't just wanted his inheritance, he wanted more of it, faster, and he was willing to commit fraud to get it. Overwhelmed by the sheer scale of Brian's deceit, Eleanor sank onto a nearby crate, the cold concrete seeping into her bones. Her son's actions went far beyond simple greed. This was a systematic, criminal betrayal. Mike, seeing her distress, gently suggested, "Maybe we should leave this for tomorrow, Mrs. Vance. This is a lot to take in." But Eleanor shook her head, a new resolve hardening her features. Arthur had foreseen all of this. He had built this sanctuary, not for himself, but for her, for this very moment. She spotted a small engraved plaque on the heavy safe. It bore a date, their wedding anniversary. With shaking fingers, she entered the familiar numbers. The heavy tumblers clicked, and the safe door swung open with a soft hiss. Inside, she found original documents Brian likely thought he had destroyed. Backup financial records, and Arthur's detailed handwritten notes on each fraudulent transaction, complete with dates, amounts, and Brian's tactics. Every piece of the puzzle, every shred of evidence, was here. And then, another letter. This one, addressed to her and placed prominently within the safe, confirmed Arthur's true purpose for the hidden room. He had built it to protect the undeniable evidence of Brian's crimes. He offered her two options. You can prosecute him, Eleanor, and see justice served through the courts. Or, you can use this evidence to force him to return everything he stole, to leave you alone, and to never bother you again. The choice, my love, is yours. But know that you are not helpless. You are protected. Eleanor spent the entire night in Arthur's subterranean sanctuary. The powerful work lamp cast long, dancing shadows, turning the concrete room into a crucible of revelation. Document after document, recorded conversation after recorded conversation, she pieced together the shocking truth. By the time the first sliver of dawn painted the sky above, Eleanor understood the full, horrifying extent of Brian's deception. He had systematically stolen nearly $100,000 from them over the past 3 years, not just through the small withdrawals Arthur had noted, but through a cunning web of forged checks, maxed-out credit applications in her name, and unauthorized loans taken against their assets. But the most chilling discovery lay in a folder labeled Future Plans. Inside, Brian's own handwriting detailed a meticulously plotted scheme. One note, scrawled with a chilling lack of empathy, read, "Mom won't last long on her own. Probably develop dementia. Need to establish pattern of mental incompetence for guardianship proceedings." Another, a timeline, laid out his ruthless intentions. Sell property immediately after Dad dies. Move Mom to assisted living facility. Cheapest option possible. Liquidate all remaining assets. Should net approximately $700K total. Eleanor's blood ran cold. He hadn't just intended to steal. He intended to erase her autonomy, to strip her of her home, her dignity, and her very identity, all for profit. Among the evidence folders were several digital recordings of Brian's visits during Arthur's final, agonizing months. Eleanor plugged in Arthur's headphones, her hands shaking, and pressed play. Brian's voice, cold and calculating, filled her ears. He was discussing her future, not with her, but with her dying husband, claiming she was already showing signs of confusion, that she was forgetting things and struggling to cope. Arthur's weak but firm voice, however, refuted every claim. Your mother is grieving and stressed, Brian, not confused. Her mind is as sharp as ever. The sound of Arthur defending her, even as he faced his own end, brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Brian's voice grew more insistent, pushing Arthur to sign papers that would grant Brian power of attorney over Eleanor. But Arthur, despite his failing health, remained resolute. I've already planned for your mother's future, Brian, he stated, his voice unwavering. And it doesn't involve you controlling her money or her life. It was then that Brian's mask had completely slipped. His voice, stripped of its false pleasantries, became laced with venom. Fine, he sneered on the recording. But when you're dead and she's wandering around that house talking to herself, don't expect me to clean up your mess. I'll make sure she's taken care of course, but it will be on my terms, and I'll take what's mine first. Eleanor ripped the headphones off, her entire body shaking with a potent cocktail of rage, heartbreak, and a searing sense of betrayal. The thought of her own son plotting her institutionalization, actively fabricating evidence of her mental decline, was beyond comprehension. He hadn't just intended to rob her. He had planned to utterly dismantle her life, to discard her like an unwanted possession. He had planned to take control, regardless of her wishes, regardless of Arthur's last stand. As the first golden rays of sunrise filtered through the opening, painting the concrete walls in a soft, ethereal glow, Eleanor carefully climbed out of the bunker, clutching the Future Plans evidence folder to her chest. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, but there was a fierce new light in her gaze. She was no longer a grieving widow. She was a woman wronged, armed with irrefutable truth. Mike, who had returned early, was waiting for her, a concerned expression on his face. Mrs. Vance, Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Before Eleanor could answer, the familiar roar of Brian's SUV once again announced his presence. This time, however, he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat, Eleanor recognized Brenda Wallace, an aggressively successful local real estate agent known for her shark-like tactics and painted-on smile. Brian emerged from the vehicle, an artificially cheerful grin plastered across his face, his eyes sweeping over Eleanor with a forced concern. "Good morning, Mom. Up bright and early. I see. I brought Brenda to help us finalize the property sale. She's an expert. She'll make everything smooth for you." He gestured expansively towards Brenda, who approached with a practiced air of sympathy. Brenda offered a saccharine smile, her gaze assessing. "Eleanor, dear, Cedric tells me you're ready to move forward with selling the property." "That's wonderful. It's perfectly understandable. Maintaining a large property at your age can be quite overwhelming, especially after such a profound loss. My condolences, truly." She extended a hand, her grip firm, almost challenging. Eleanor took her hand, her eyes locking with Brenda's, her voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the agent's condescending facade. "Thank you, Brenda, but I haven't decided to sell anything yet." Brenda Wallace, undeterred by Eleanor's quiet defiance, pulled a fresh stack of contracts from her sleek leather brief. "Just a few minor clarifications, dear," she cooed, her smile unwavering. "Nothing to worry your pretty head about. Standard procedure." Eleanor took the papers, her grip firm around the evidence folder she still carried. Brian paced impatiently, while Brenda tapped her pen on the top page, her eyes urging Eleanor to hurry, but Eleanor ignored them both. She read every word, every clause, her heart turning to ice with each line. The minor clarifications included clauses that granted Brian immediate power of attorney, authorization for all decisions regarding her care and residency, and language subtly, yet explicitly, suggesting her mental incompetence. They were trying to ensnare her, just as Arthur had warned. "This says you have the authority to determine where I live," Eleanor stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, as she looked directly at Brian. Brian tried to wave it off with a dismissive hand. "It's just a precaution, Mom, for your own good. You know, if you ever needed it." Brenda chimed in, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "It's very common at your age, Mrs. Vance. A safety net, really. We want to make sure you're properly cared for." Eleanor barely heard them. She was seeing through their charade, recognizing the insidious narrative Arthur had meticulously chronicled in his recordings and notes. They weren't offering her a safety net. They were tightening a noose. They were setting up the exact scenario Arthur had foreseen, trying to establish a paper trail for her supposed mental decline. "I'm not signing these," Eleanor said, calmly, definitively, as she gently set the papers down on the patio table. Brian's carefully constructed patience snapped, his face flushed with anger. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. We don't have time for this. This is a perfectly good offer, and Thompson Properties isn't going to wait around while you play games." Eleanor, however, remained unnervingly calm. She looked at her son, then at Brenda, understanding fully the depth of their manipulation, the casual cruelty of their scheme. "I think I understand the situation now," she said, her voice clear and resonant. Brenda, still clinging to the illusion of control, reached for her pen, ready to guide Eleanor's hand. But Eleanor raised hers, a silent, powerful gesture. "The next chapter of my life," she announced, her eyes boring into Brian's, "doesn't include either of you." Brian's confident smirk wavered. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the second mortgage you took out on this house without my knowledge," Eleanor stated, her voice gaining strength, each word a hammer blow. "I'm talking about the forged checks, the credit cards you opened in my name and maxed out. I know about all of it, Brian." His face went pale, the color draining from it as if someone had pulled a plug. He stammered, a pathetic attempt at denial. "What are you talking about, Mom? That's insane. You're confused." Eleanor didn't let him finish. From the evidence folder, she pulled out a clear photograph of a $3,000 check, made out to cash, bearing a crude but convincing forgery of her signature. She held it up, letting it hang in the air between them. Brenda, her professional smile completely gone, took an involuntary step back, her gaze darting between the photo and Brian's ashen face. She then turned, without a word, and retreated hastily to her car. Eleanor turned her full attention back to Brian, her voice unwavering. "I understand that you've systematically stolen nearly $100,000 from your father and me. I understand that you tried to increase your father's life insurance coverage while he was dying, forging his signature. And I understand that you've been actively planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could liquidate all my assets and put me in the cheapest assisted living facility you could find." Brian's mask fell completely. His face contorted, not with regret, but with a raw, ugly anger. "That money was going to be mine anyway," he snarled, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You and Dad were just hoarding it, holding on to it for no reason. You don't need it at your age, Mom. And Dad certainly didn't need it when he was on his deathbed." He was lashing out, revealing the true depth of his entitled resentment. He wasn't desperate. He simply felt that everything they had was owed to him. "Your father," Eleanor said, her voice soft but laced with steel, "left me more than just evidence of your crimes, Brian. He left me the means to fight you." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Brian's face. He tried to regain his footing, to reassert control. "You can't prove any of this, Mom. It's just old woman's rambling. Who would believe you?" Without a word, Eleanor opened the evidence folder fully, revealing its meticulously organized contents. Bank statements, copies of forged documents, Arthur's detailed notes, and the digital recorder with its damning voice memos. "Arthur was very thorough," she said, her eyes unwavering. "He knew exactly what you were capable of. He prepared for you." Brian stared at the contents of the folder, his bravado finally crumbling, replaced by a desperate, cornered fury. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, making his final, unforgivable mistake. "You think you're clever, old woman? I know where you live. I know your routines. I know how vulnerable you are." The threat was unmistakable, chilling, and utterly confirming Arthur's darkest fears. Brian's thinly veiled threat hung in the air, cold and menacing. "I know where you live. I know your routines. I know how vulnerable you are." But instead of fear, Eleanor felt an unfamiliar surge of power. He had exposed himself completely. "Get out, Brian," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Get out of my house and off my property. Now." Stunned by her unwavering resolve, Brian hesitated for a moment, then spun around and stormed to his car, peeling out of the driveway in a cloud of dust and gravel. As the sound of his engine faded into the distance, Eleanor returned to the underground bunker. She retrieved an unassuming folder labeled "Emergency Protocol." Inside, among meticulous instructions, lay a single business card. Detective Maria Santos, Major Crimes Division. Arthur, even in his final agony, had been building a relationship with law enforcement, ensuring that his careful collection of evidence would not be in vain. Within an hour, Detective Santos, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and sharp, intelligent eyes, arrived. Eleanor led her to the bunker, presenting Arthur's evidence. Detective Santos listened intently, her expression grim, as Eleanor recounted the revelations. "Mr. Vance contacted us months ago, Mrs. Vance," Santos explained, her voice calm. "He was concerned about financial irregularities, but insisted on having all his ducks in a row before we acted. He wanted thorough documentation. He didn't want anything to jeopardize your security after he was gone." She confirmed that they had, in fact, been quietly building a case against Brian Vance, following Arthur's careful breadcrumbs. Arthur's priority had been Eleanor's protection, above all else. Eleanor then showed her the fraudulent power of attorney contracts Brian had tried to force on her just moments ago. Detective Santos's eyes hardened. "Yes, Mrs. Vance, this gives us what we need for a stronger charge." Santos went on to explain Arthur's ingenious honeypot strategy. "We've been monitoring Brian, with your husband's cooperation. Every attempt he made to access accounts, every forged document, every desperate phone call. We've been documenting it. Each action he took, thinking he was being clever, was only deepening his criminal liability. Arthur had even set up a legal trust that would automatically seize any assets Brian had purchased with stolen money if he were convicted. The meticulousness of Arthur's planning was staggering. Based on what Mr. Vance provided and what we've documented since, Santos concluded, your son has committed enough additional crimes to be looking at a minimum of 15 to 20 years in prison. A cold satisfaction, devoid of joy but infused with justice, settled over Eleanor. To secure a definitive confession, Eleanor agreed to wear a wire during her next interaction with Brian. It didn't take long for him to call, his voice now artificially calm, almost pleading. Mom, please. Let's talk this through like adults. I made some mistakes, I admit it. But we can fix this. The next morning, Brian arrived, a practiced remorse on his face. He apologized for his mistakes, blaming financial pressure and misguided ambition. He admitted to borrowing some money, maybe $10,000 at most, Mom. Eleanor remained silent, knowing the true figure was closer to $100,000. He even confessed to the second mortgage, claiming it was a temporary measure. Finally, he acknowledged the mentally incompetent contracts, but insisted they were merely precautionary to ensure her well-being. Eleanor listened, her heart aching for the son she had lost, the man he should have been. Then, as she calmly began to reiterate her refusal to sell, his composure shattered. Look, Mom, he growled, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be. Accidents happen all the time. Falls downstairs, kitchen fires, heart attacks, brought on by stress. The recording device, hidden within Eleanor's blouse, captured every chilling word. As soon as Brian left, Eleanor called Detective Santos. It's done, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Santos confirmed Brian would be arrested tomorrow morning. The following day, just as the sun rose, Eleanor led Detective Santos and a team of federal agents back to the bunker. Arthur's final, and perhaps most significant, revelation awaited them. Within the safe, alongside all the incriminating evidence, was documentation confirming he had quietly transferred ownership of the house and land into an irrevocable trust, specifically naming Eleanor as the sole beneficiary, entirely bypassing Brian. The property was safe, beyond Brian's reach, regardless of the outcome of his trial. Hours later, Brian Vance was arrested in his own driveway. His wife, Emily, emerging from their house, looking genuinely surprised and distraught. The subsequent trial was swift, due to Arthur's irrefutable evidence and Brian's recorded confession. Brian was convicted on 17 felony counts, sentenced to 22 years in prison, and all the assets he had purchased with stolen money were recovered and returned to Eleanor. 6 months later, the roar of excavators was replaced by the gentle hum of activity as landscapers, working from Arthur's painstakingly detailed plans, meticulously rebuilt the garden. Arthur had even paid for it in advance, a final act of love and foresight. The bunker, no longer a vault of secrets, was converted into a state-of-the-art root cellar and seed storage, a sanctuary of growth and renewal. Eleanor hired Mike to build a beautiful greenhouse, a place where she could nurture new life. She reconnected with old friends, forming a new community, rebuilding her life with a quiet confidence, realizing her own profound strength. 5 years passed. Developers still occasionally inquired about the property, but Eleanor politely declined every offer. The garden, now a vibrant tapestry of life, was more than just land. It was a testament to love, patience, and a legacy worth more than money. She had learned that she could take care of herself, that Arthur's love had truly protected her, and that the garden was no longer just his, or hers, it was ours. A collaboration of a shared past and a thriving future, blooming with the promise of tomorrow.